In the heart of the vast, sprawling wilderness, where towering trees cast long shadows and the night sky glittered with 1,000 stars, our group of teenagers embarked on a camping adventure that would forever be etched into our memories. As the sun began its descent, casting an ethereal glow over the campsite, we gathered in the grand party tent, our voices mingling in a cacophony of laughter and chatter. As the evening progressed, our conversations flowed freely, fueled by the lively banter and the occasional sip of stolen beer. Moments of silence were filled with anticipation, the crackling of the campfire providing a comforting rhythm. Amidst the revelry, a sudden hush fell over the group, the sound of our laughter fading into a whisper. It was in that eerie silence that one of us, a girl named Sarah, noticed a peculiar sound. It was a faint chanting, barely audible above the quiet rustling of leaves. She strained her ears, her heart pounding with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. "Everybody shut up right now," she hissed, her voice carrying a sense of urgency. We obeyed her command, our boisterous laughter replaced by an unnerving silence. As the noise subsided, the chanting grew louder, echoing through the dense foliage. It was a guttural, unintelligible incantation, sending shivers down our spines. Driven by a morbid fascination, Sarah cautiously unzipped the entrance of the tent, her eyes wide with fear and anticipation. What she saw chilled us to the bone. Just beyond the edge of the campfire's flickering light, a family huddled together in a macabre display. The adults, a middle-aged couple, were rocking back and forth violently, their bodies convulsing in time with the strange chanting. At the center of their circle, 2 children, a boy and a girl, sat with their heads bowed. Their bodies were rigid, and their eyes were vacant and unfocused. As we watched in silent horror, the adults' incantation grew louder, their voices rising in a crescendo of desperation. They began to shake the children violently, their movements becoming more and more erratic. The children's frail bodies trembled, but they remained unresponsive, their faces devoid of any emotion. We were frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. We knew we had to do something, but the adults' strange behavior had left us disoriented and confused. Sarah's grip on the zipper tightened, her knuckles turning white from the strain. Suddenly, one of the adults turned their head towards our tent, their eyes glowing an eerie red in the dim light. They stopped chanting and stared at us, their expressions contorted into grotesque masks of fury. In that moment, time seemed to slow down as an inexplicable terror surged through our veins. We scattered in panic, desperate to escape the nightmare that was unfolding before our eyes. As we stumbled through the darkness, the chanting followed us, growing louder and more insistent with every step. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches reaching out like grasping claws. We ran blindly, our hearts pounding in our chests, fear fueling our desperation. Behind us, we could hear the sound of heavy footsteps pursuing us, the adults' raspy voices chanting in unison. Just when we thought our legs were about to give out, we stumbled upon the safety of our cars. We piled into our vehicles and sped away, our headlights cutting through the darkness as we left the nightmarish scene behind. As we drove back to civilization, we couldn't shake the feeling that we had witnessed something truly sinister. The image of the family performing the exorcism haunted our minds, the memory of their chanting forever etched into our consciousness. In the days and weeks that followed, we tried to rationalize what we had seen. We searched for news reports about missing children or strange occurrences in the area, but we found nothing. It was as if that night had vanished into thin air, leaving only a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows. Years later, we gathered together again, our lives having taken different paths. But even after all that time, the memory of that fateful night returned to us in vivid detail. As we shared our experiences, we realized that we each had kept a secret about that night. We had seen something truly horrific, something we could never fully comprehend or erase from our minds. And so, the story of the camping trip became a chilling legend whispered among our group, a tale of teenage recklessness and the darkness that can be found in the most unexpected places. As time passed, the details of that night grew hazy, but the sense of terror remained, a constant reminder of the fragility of our sanity and the unseen dangers that lay hidden within the vast wilderness. I was only 10 years old, but my father had decided it was time for me to experience the great outdoors. We packed our bags, loaded up the car, and set off on a road trip to the beautiful state of Maine. The drive was long, but the anticipation of our camping adventure kept me excited. As we drove through the winding roads, the dense forest seemed to swallow us whole. The trees were so tall and the air was so crisp that it felt like we were entering a different world. We finally arrived at our campsite, nestled deep within the woods. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape. My father and I set up our tent, gathered firewood, and started a small fire to keep us warm during the chilly Maine nights. As the embers of the fire began to die down, my father and I decided it was time to get some rest. We crawled into our sleeping bags, the crackling of the fire lulling us to sleep. Suddenly, a sound pierced the silence of the night. It was a bone-chilling moan that echoed through the woods. My father and I exchanged worried glances, our hearts pounding in our chests. "It's probably just the trees rubbing together," my father said, trying to reassure both of us. But the sound came again, this time louder and more terrifying. My father grabbed the flashlight, and I followed closely behind him, clutching a large stick. I was determined to protect my father if something went wrong. We ventured deeper into the woods, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the darkness. The eerie silence was broken only by the sound of our footsteps and the occasional rustling of leaves. As we walked, the bone-chilling moan echoed through the trees once more. This time, it seemed to be coming from a different direction. My father and I exchanged worried glances, unsure of what to do next. We decided to split up, hoping to cover more ground and find the source of the sound. My father went left, and I went right, both of us armed with flashlights and sticks. As I walked deeper into the woods, the darkness seemed to close in around me. The sound of the moan grew louder, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. Suddenly, I saw something moving in the shadows. It was a large, shadowy figure, its eyes glowing in the darkness. I froze, unsure of what to do. The figure moved closer, and I could see that it was a massive, black bear. Its eyes were locked on me, and I knew that I was in danger. I gripped my stick tightly, my hands shaking with fear. The bear let out a low growl, and I knew that I had to act fast. I raised my stick, ready to defend myself against the bear. The creature seemed to sense my determination, and it stopped in its tracks. We stood there, staring at each other in the darkness. The bear's eyes were filled with a strange intelligence, as if it was sizing me up. I knew that I couldn't hold my ground forever. The bear was massive, and I was just a small boy with a stick. But I refused to back down, determined to protect my father and myself. Suddenly, the bear let out a loud roar and charged towards me. I screamed and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the bear crashing through the underbrush behind me, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. I ran as fast as I could, my legs burning with the effort. Finally, I saw the light of the campfire in the distance. I sprinted towards it, my heart filled with relief. As I reached the campsite, I saw my father standing by the fire, his face filled with concern. He rushed towards me, his arms outstretched. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. I told him about the bear, and he hugged me tightly, relieved that I was safe. We spent the rest of the night huddled around the fire, too afraid to venture back into the woods. The bone-chilling moan never came again, but the memory of the bear stayed with us for the rest of our trip. As we packed up our campsite and prepared to leave, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I had faced my fears and stood up to a dangerous predator, and I had survived. That summer in Maine was a turning point in my life. It taught me the importance of courage, determination, and the bond between a father and his son. And although I never heard the bone-chilling moan again, the memory of that night would stay with me forever. The stars twirled in a celestial dance as the moon, like a celestial sentinel, bathed the remote expanse of the Pacific Northwest forest in its ethereal glow. I found myself ensnared within the heart of this verdant wilderness, far removed from the trappings of civilization, embraced by the primeval hush of the ancient trees. I had ventured forth with my brother, seeking solace and adventure in the untamed embrace of nature. We had established our campsite deep within the Emerald Labyrinth, far from any designated campgrounds, accessible only through winding, concealed trails that snaked through the dense foliage. It was a sanctuary untouched by the invasive march of human hands, amplifying the haunting and isolated ambience. Our tent stood sentinel in a secluded clearing, enveloped by towering trees whose gnarled limbs reached up like grasping fingers towards the starlit canopy. A crackling bonfire cast a warm, dancing glow, its flames casting flickering shadows against the velvety darkness. As night descended, an unsettling symphony of sounds began to permeate the forest, each note amplified by the eerie stillness. The symphony of nocturnal nature blended with a discordant undercurrent, a haunting melody woven from whispers and moans that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the surrounding trees. Deep within the core of my being, an unsettling apprehension took root, a primal instinct warning of an unseen presence lurking in the darkness. The campfire, once a source of comfort, now seemed a beacon, attracting the attention of unseen entities. Rest proved elusive as the night wore on. Every rustle, every groan, and every distant howl sent shivers down my spine. The laughter echoed again, higher this time, accompanied by a crescendo of coconut-like thuds that defied the dominance of pine trees. Panic surged through me as I realized the laughter was no longer high above but seemed to circle our campsite, drawing closer with each passing moment. Fear propelled us into action. We huddled together within the confines of our tent, our hearts pounding in unison like war drums, every sound from the outside world magnified by our terror. The laughter morphed into something sinister, a chorus of deranged voices mocking our vulnerability. Time seemed to warp as we waited, trapped in a cycle of fear and anticipation. The thuds grew louder, closer, like some unseen behemoth stalking us through the darkness. We held our breath, the fragility of our existence palpable in the heavy silence. Then, with an abruptness that made my heart leap into my throat, the noises ceased. The laughter, the thuds, the whispers, all vanished into the night, leaving behind only a nerve-wracking void. A cautious silence hung between us as we waited, straining our ears for any sign of the unseen presence. Slowly, as if emerging from a nightmare, we unzipped the tent and peered out into the darkness. The forest stood silent and still, the primal symphony replaced by a deathly hush. The moon cast its cold light upon the campsite, revealing no trace of our tormentors. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the canopy, we packed up our belongings and fled that accursed campsite. We never looked back, haunted by the haunting encounter that transpired beneath the starlit sky. In the aftermath, we sought solace in the mundane world, desperate to distance ourselves from the horrors we had endured. We shared our story with hushed tones, met with skepticism and disbelief from those who had not experienced the true terror of that night. But the memory lingered, an indelible scar etched upon our souls. The forest, once a sanctuary, transformed into a realm of primal fear, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurred, and unseen entities danced in the shadows, forever haunting the edges of our minds. The sun was setting over the dense woods that surrounded the small, secluded town of Willow Creek, Oregon. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. It was the perfect setting for a weekend getaway, and that's exactly what my best friend, Emily, and I had planned. Emily lived in a modest two-story house on the outskirts of town, nestled between sprawling fields and towering trees. Her closest neighbors were the Roloff family, known for their reality TV show, Little People Big World. The Roloffs were a friendly bunch, and we often saw them tending to their farm or riding around on their ATVs. As we pulled up to Emily's house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and anticipation. We had been planning this camping trip for months, and now it was finally happening. Emily's parents had given us their blessing, and we were eager to set up our tent and spend the night under the stars. After unloading our gear from the car, Emily and I began the task of setting up our tent in the backyard. The yard was surrounded by dense woods, and the only sounds we could hear were the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. As we worked, Emily told me about her experiences living in such an isolated area. She spoke of the deer that would often wander into her yard, the owls that hooted in the night, and the occasional coyote that would howl in the distance. "It's not as scary as it sounds," Emily assured me. "You just have to be aware of your surroundings and respect the wildlife." With the tent finally set up, we decided to start a small campfire and roast some marshmallows. As the fire crackled and popped, we talked and laughed, enjoying each other's company and the peaceful surroundings. As the night wore on, Emily and I decided to call it a night. We crawled into our sleeping bags, eager to drift off to sleep under the stars. However, our peaceful slumber was soon interrupted by a strange noise. At first, I thought it was just a small animal rustling around in the bushes, but then I heard it again, a distinct set of footsteps, right outside our tent. Emily and I exchanged worried glances, our hearts pounding in our chests. We lay there in silence, listening intently for any further sounds. Suddenly, we heard a soft thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of something pressing against the tent. It wasn't a small animal, it was much larger. Emily and I were frozen in fear, unable to scream or move. We lay there, our eyes wide with terror, as the seconds ticked by. Just when we thought the situation couldn't get any worse, the zipper on the tent's door began to move. Zip, zip, zip. The sound was deafening in the otherwise silent night. Emily and I let out a blood-curdling scream, our voices echoing through the woods. We clung to each other, our hearts racing as we waited for whatever was outside to make its move. Suddenly, the tent's door flew open, revealing a dark, shadowy figure. Emily and I screamed again, our voices raw with fear. Just as we thought all hope was lost, we heard the sound of footsteps running towards us. It was Emily's mom, who had been awakened by our screams. She quickly assessed the situation and ushered us out of the tent, her eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. Emily's dad soon joined us, armed with a flashlight and a shotgun. Together, they searched the property, but found no sign of the intruder. The woods were eerily quiet, as if the creature had vanished into thin air. In the days that followed, Emily and I tried to make sense of what had happened. We spoke to the Roloffs, who had also heard strange noises in the night but had never encountered anything as terrifying as what we had experienced. We searched the internet for any information on similar incidents in the area, but found nothing. It was as if our encounter had been a one-time event, a bizarre and inexplicable occurrence that left us shaken and afraid. As the weeks turned into months, Emily and I slowly began to put the incident behind us. We continued to camp in her backyard, but always with a heightened sense of awareness and caution. And though we never discovered the true identity of our mysterious visitor, we knew one thing for certain: the woods surrounding Emily's house were not as peaceful and serene as they seemed. There were secrets lurking in the shadows, waiting to be discovered. It was a warm summer evening in the small town of Okeechobee, Florida. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. I was sitting on my porch, sipping on a glass of sweet tea, when I received a mysterious letter. The envelope was old and weathered, as if it had been through a storm. The handwriting was elegant and old-fashioned, but the message inside was clear. Dear Mr. Jameson, I hope this letter finds you well. I am writing to invite you to a camping trip in the heart of the Everglades. The location is a secret, known only to a select few. This is an opportunity to experience the true beauty and mystery of the Florida wilderness. Please let me know if you are interested in joining us. We will be departing on the night of the full moon, which is in 2 weeks. Sincerely, a friend. I was intrigued by the invitation, but also a bit hesitant. I had never been camping in the Everglades before, and I had heard stories of the dangers that lurked within its swamps and forests. However, the allure of adventure was too strong to resist, and I decided to accept the invitation. The night of the full moon arrived, and I found myself standing in front of a small, rustic cabin deep in the heart of the Everglades. The cabin was surrounded by towering cypress trees, their branches adorned with Spanish moss that swayed gently in the breeze. A group of people had already gathered, each one dressed in rugged outdoor gear. A tall, slender man with a neatly trimmed beard approached me. "Welcome, Mr. Jameson," he said, extending his hand. "I'm your host, Mr. Thompson. I'm glad you could make it." I shook his hand and introduced myself. "Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Thompson. This place is truly breathtaking." "Indeed it is," he replied, his eyes scanning the surrounding wilderness. "Now let's get started. We have a long journey ahead of us." We set off into the darkness, guided by the light of the full moon. The group consisted of 8 people, including myself. Mr. Thompson led the way, followed by a young woman named Sarah, who seemed to be his assistant. The rest of the group consisted of a diverse mix of individuals, each with their own unique background and personality. As we hiked deeper into the Everglades, the landscape became more rugged and untamed. We crossed swamps filled with alligators, navigated dense forests, and climbed over rocky outcroppings. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation, and the sounds of the night echoed all around us: the croaking of frogs, the rustling of leaves, and the distant howls of wolves. After several hours of hiking, we finally reached our destination, a small clearing nestled between 2 massive cypress trees. Mr. Thompson instructed us to set up our tents and start a fire, while he and Sarah disappeared into the darkness, presumably to scout the area and gather firewood. As we worked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping over me. The darkness seemed to be closing in, and the sounds of the night grew louder and more ominous. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that it was just my imagination. Once the camp was set up, we gathered around the fire, sharing stories and getting to know each other. The conversation flowed easily, and I found myself enjoying the company of my fellow campers. However, as the night wore on, the atmosphere began to change. It started with a faint whisper, carried on the wind. At first I thought it was just the rustling of leaves or the distant call of a bird. But then, the whisper grew louder, and I could make out words. "Never camping in the Florida." The voice was eerie and otherworldly, and it sent a chill down my spine. I looked around, but no one else seemed to have heard it. I tried to dismiss the voice as a figment of my imagination, but it persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Suddenly, the voice changed, becoming deeper and more menacing. "Never camping in the Florida Everglades." The words echoed through the night, sending a wave of terror through the camp. The other campers looked around, their faces etched with fear. Mr. Thompson and Sarah returned to the camp, their faces pale and drawn. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We've encountered this before," Mr. Thompson replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's an old legend, a warning to those who dare to camp in the Everglades." "But what does it mean?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "It means that we're not alone," Sarah said, her eyes wide with fear. "There are spirits here, trapped in the swamps and forests. They're angry and vengeful, and they don't want us here." The campers huddled together, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames of the fire. The voice continued to whisper in the darkness, growing louder and more menacing with each passing moment. "We have to leave," Mr. Thompson said, his voice filled with determination. "We can't stay here any longer." The group quickly packed up their tents and gear, their movements frantic and disorganized. As we prepared to leave, the voice grew even louder, filling the air with a cacophony of angry whispers. "Never camping in the Florida Everglades." The words seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, echoing through the trees and swamps. The campers exchanged frightened glances, their faces etched with terror. "Let's go," Mr. Thompson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We have to get out of here." The group set off into the darkness, guided by the light of the full moon. The voice continued to follow us, whispering in our ears and filling our minds with fear. We hiked for hours, driven by a desperate need to escape the haunting presence that seemed to be stalking us. As dawn approached, we finally emerged from the Everglades, exhausted and terrified. We stumbled into a small town, where we were met by a group of concerned locals. They had been searching for us, worried that we had become lost in the swamps. We were taken to a nearby hospital, where we were treated for dehydration and exhaustion. The doctors and nurses were puzzled by our story, but they couldn't deny the fear that was etched into our faces. As we recovered, we learned that the voice we had heard in the Everglades was a well-known legend in the area. It was said that the spirits of those who had died in the swamps and forests were trapped there, unable to move on to the afterlife. They were angry and vengeful, and they would do anything to protect their territory from intruders. In the weeks that followed, I struggled to come to terms with my experience in the Everglades. I had always been a skeptic when it came to the supernatural, but the events of that night had shaken my beliefs to the core. I tried to forget about the haunting presence that had followed us through the swamps, but the memories refused to fade. I found myself drawn to the stories of the Everglades, searching for answers and understanding. Eventually, I returned to the small town where we had been rescued, hoping to find some closure. I spoke to the locals, who shared their own experiences with the haunting presence that lurked in the swamps. They told me that the spirits were not evil, but simply misunderstood. They were trapped in a world between life and death, and they were desperate for someone to listen to their stories and set them free. As I stood on the edge of the Everglades, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that I would never forget the haunting presence that had followed us through the swamps, but I also knew that I had gained a new appreciation for the beauty and mystery of the Florida wilderness. And so, I left the Everglades behind, carrying with me the memories of a journey that had changed my life forever. Under the cloak of a starry expanse, our family huddled around a crackling campfire, deep within the embrace of a secluded wilderness. The hypnotic dance of flames cast flickering shadows that stretched and contorted like specters, adding an eerie ambience to our ghost storytelling ritual. As the night deepened, our tales grew darker, more sinister. We spoke of phantom footsteps echoing through desolate corridors, disembodied whispers carried on the wind, and apparitions that materialized from the depths of nightmares. With each chilling narrative, the boundary between reality and fiction seemed to blur, as if the stories themselves were seeping into our surroundings. Suddenly, a piercing shriek shattered the tranquility. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced around, searching for the source of the disturbance. My wife and children looked equally startled, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. The campfire sputtered and dimmed, casting the surroundings into an ominous gloom. Moments later, the eerie silence was broken by a faint scratching sound. It came from the direction of the dense undergrowth that encircled our campsite. My pulse quickened as I strained my ears to identify the source, but the sound remained elusive, as if it were deliberately playing with our senses. Fear gnawed at my mind as I recalled the ghost story we had just finished telling, a tale of a malevolent spirit that haunted the very woods where we were camped. The scratching sound intensified, growing louder and more persistent. It was as if an unseen presence were circling us, closing in on our sanctuary. With trembling hands, I reached for my flashlight and pointed its beam into the darkness. A pair of glowing red eyes stared back at me from the shadows, their gaze filled with malice and hunger. I gasped and stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight in my panic. The eyes disappeared as quickly as they had appeared, leaving me shaken and filled with a primal dread. As we huddled together for comfort, the eerie phenomena continued. The flames in the campfire seemed to take on grotesque shapes, morphing into menacing figures that danced and taunted us with their shadowy forms. The scratching sound drew nearer, circling our campsite with relentless precision. Just when our terror reached a fever pitch, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. It was my wife's voice, filled with unspeakable horror. I turned to face her, my heart pounding in my ears, only to witness a sight that sent shivers down my spine. Her eyes were wide with terror, her face contorted in agony as if she were being strangled by an unseen force. I lunged forward to her aid, but my hands passed through her ethereal form as if she were nothing more than a ghost herself. The scratching sound reached its crescendo, and the campfire flared to life, casting an otherworldly glow on the scene. In that moment, I realized the horrifying truth. The ghost stories we had told had somehow become our reality. The malevolent spirits we had conjured with our words had crossed the boundary between fiction and actuality, seeking vengeance for our trespass into their realm. As the nightmare unfolded, I watched in helpless horror as my family vanished one by one, their screams echoing through the night. The campfire crackled and sputtered, growing dimmer and dimmer until it was finally extinguished, leaving us in total darkness. Alone and filled with despair, I stumbled through the undergrowth, desperate to escape the clutches of the vengeful spirits. But at every turn, I encountered new horrors. The trees seemed to whisper my name, and their gnarled branches reached out to ensnare me. The ground beneath my feet gave way, and I found myself trapped in a pit of darkness. As I lay there, shivering and filled with terror, I knew that my fate was sealed. The ghost stories we had told had become our undoing, blurring the lines between reality and fiction in a way that would forever haunt me. And as the darkness consumed me, I whispered a final prayer, begging for forgiveness for the trespass we had committed upon the spirits of the wilderness. Beneath a celestial tapestry adorned with a myriad of twinkling stars, four intrepid souls, myself, Emily, Ben, and Ethan, found ourselves drawn to a place shrouded in mystery and intrigue. It was an off-limits area, a forbidden campsite nestled deep within the sprawling wilderness that beckoned us with an irresistible allure. We had stumbled upon tales whispered in hushed tones, stories of unsettling occurrences and unexplained phenomena that plagued the campsite. The locals spoke of it with a mixture of fear and reverence, warning of dire consequences that befell those who dared to trespass. Far from deterring us, these whispers only fueled our curiosity, stoking a primal desire to unravel the secrets that lay hidden within those forbidden grounds. As the sun began its inexorable descent, casting long, eerie shadows across the untamed landscape, we ventured into the forbidden territory, our hearts pounding with anticipation. The path, barely discernible amidst the dense undergrowth, wound its way through towering trees that seemed to whisper secrets to the wind. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the weight of untold stories. As we approached the campsite, a sense of unease washed over us. It was as if the very ground beneath our feet held its breath, anticipating our arrival. A dilapidated wooden sign, half concealed by overgrown vines, bore a stark warning: "Keep out. Danger." It served only to heighten our resolve. Cautiously, we stepped into the campsite, our eyes scanning the surroundings. Time seemed to stand still as we took in the dilapidated tents, their canvas torn and faded by the relentless passage of time. A campfire pit, long since extinguished, lay at the heart of the campsite, casting an ominous glow on the gathering darkness. It was Emily who noticed it first, a faint glimmer, barely perceptible amidst the ruins of the campsite. Curiosity overcame fear as she cautiously approached a dilapidated tent, its entrance obscured by a thick curtain of vines. With trembling hands, she peeled back the fabric, revealing a scene that sent shivers down our spines. In the flickering light of a dying flashlight, we beheld the skeletal remains of a human hand, its bones still clutching a rusted knife. The discovery sent a collective gasp through our group, the weight of the campsite's dark secrets crashing down upon us. Fear propelled us into action. We stumbled back into the darkness, our footsteps echoing through the silent forest. But the horrors we had witnessed that night refused to be left behind. As we fled, we could hear the whispers of the forest growing louder, the trees themselves seeming to mock our retreat. In the days that followed, the campsite's secrets haunted our waking moments and plagued our dreams. Emily's discovery had shattered the illusion of youthful invincibility, revealing the fragility of our existence. We knew we had to return, to uncover the truth behind the horrors that lay buried beneath the surface. With grim determination, we assembled once more, armed with flashlights and a newfound resolve. As we approached the campsite for the second time, the atmosphere was even more oppressive than before. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches reaching out like grasping claws. Guided by the feeble beam of our flashlights, we retraced our steps to the dilapidated tent. With bated breath, we lifted the macabre curtain, revealing the skeletal hand once again. This time, however, our eyes were drawn to something else, a small, leather-bound book lying open beside the remains. Hesitantly, Emily reached out and picked up the book. As she flipped through its yellowed pages, a gasp escaped her lips. Written in faded ink were the chilling confessions of a man who had once been a camper on this very site. His words painted a gruesome picture of unspeakable horrors that had occurred within these cursed grounds. With hearts pounding in our chests, we read the man's account. He had been part of a group of campers who had stumbled upon a dark secret hidden beneath the campsite. They had discovered an ancient burial ground, the resting place of a long-forgotten tribe. The spirits of the dead, angered by their intrusion, had sought vengeance upon the trespassers. One by one, the campers had met gruesome ends, their bodies torn apart, and their souls claimed by the vengeful spirits. The man who had written the confession had managed to escape, but the horrors he had witnessed had forever scarred his mind. He had returned to the campsite, driven by a desperate need to warn others of its deadly secret, only to meet the same fate as his companions. As we finished reading the man's confession, a cold wind swept through the campsite, extinguishing our flashlights and plunging us into darkness. We stumbled and fell, our cries for help lost in the unforgiving wilderness. Panic surged through us as we realized that we were trapped, at the mercy of the vengeful spirits that haunted this cursed ground. The isolated valley whispered secrets lost to time, each echo a haunting murmur reverberating through its desolate expanse. My partner, Emily, and I, driven by wanderlust and an unquenchable thirst for the unknown, ventured into this enigmatic realm. As we set up camp amidst towering cliffs that cast long, eerie shadows, the silence was deafening, punctuated only by the distant cry of a solitary raven. A sense of foreboding hung in the air, a silent sentinel guarding the valley's cryptic past. With dawn's pale light, we embarked on our exploration, eager to unravel the mysteries that enveloped this forgotten place. Our footsteps echoed off the sheer rock faces, creating a symphony of sound that seemed to dance with the wind. Emily, ever the keen observer, noticed something peculiar about the echoes. They possessed a strange, almost ethereal quality, as if they carried whispers of a bygone era. Intrigued, we experimented, clapping our hands and calling out, marveling as the echoes seemed to linger, carrying hidden messages within their reverberations. With each clap and call, the echoes grew in intensity, morphing from mere reverberations to distinct, intelligible whispers. They whispered of a time when the valley teemed with life, of ancient tribes and forgotten rituals. Slowly, piece by piece, the echoes revealed a chilling tale of betrayal and hidden treasure. A powerful amulet, imbued with the spirits of the valley's ancestors, was said to lie hidden within its depths. Greed and treachery had torn the tribe apart, and the amulet, once a symbol of unity, became a catalyst for their downfall. As the echoes unveiled the gruesome details of the tribe's demise, a palpable sense of unease crept over us. The valley, once a sanctuary, now bore the weight of a dark and violent past. Driven by a morbid curiosity, we followed the echoes' guidance, venturing deeper into the valley's treacherous heart. The echoes grew louder, more insistent, as they led us through a labyrinth of narrow gorges and sheer cliffs. Emily's flashlight cut through the darkness, casting grotesque shadows that danced ominously on the rock walls. Fear gnawed at our minds, but we pressed on, compelled by the echo's inexorable pull. We stumbled upon a hidden cave, its entrance concealed by a dense curtain of ivy. The echoes intensified, reaching a deafening crescendo, as they coalesced into a single, chilling word: beware. Emily hesitated, her eyes wide with apprehension. Yet, curiosity had taken hold of us, and we cautiously entered the cave. The air inside was thick with an oppressive silence, heavy with anticipation. Our flashlights illuminated a series of ancient carvings etched into the cave walls. They depicted scenes of rituals and sacrifices, the faces of the figures contorted in agony and ecstasy. The echoes whispered the stories behind each carving, tales of power, pain, and the relentless march of time. In the deepest chamber of the cave, beneath a crumbling altar, we found it, the amulet. It was a small, unassuming object made of a strange, iridescent stone. As we reached out to retrieve it, the cave trembled, and the echoes erupted in a cacophony of wails and laughter. A ghostly apparition appeared before us, its eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. The apparition revealed itself as the last guardian of the amulet, a shaman who had witnessed the tribe's downfall firsthand. It warned us of the amulet's dark power, of the greed and destruction it had wrought in the past. It implored us to leave the valley, to break the cycle of violence and suffering that had plagued this place for centuries. We heeded the guardian's warning, returning the amulet to its resting place. As we emerged from the cave, the echoes subsided, leaving only the desolate silence of the valley. The sun had set, casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. Emily and I stood together, contemplating the weight of the secrets we had uncovered. The valley would forever hold a special place in our hearts, a place where the past whispered its secrets through the echoes. We knew that the amulet's power remained, forever bound to this remote and enigmatic realm. But we also knew that it was a power that must never be wielded again. As we left the valley, the echoes of the past followed us, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows of time. We had touched the fringes of an ancient tragedy, a story of power, greed, and betrayal etched into the very fabric of the land. And as the echoes faded into the distance, we carried with us a profound respect for the secrets that the valley held and a deep understanding of the importance of leaving some mysteries undisturbed. In the untamed embrace of the Wyoming wilderness, where towering peaks kissed the heavens and emerald valleys whispered secrets of untamed nature, a group of strangers gathered for a wilderness survival challenge. I was among them, eager to test my mettle and push the boundaries of my abilities. Little did we know that our adventure would soon spiral into a harrowing ordeal, a dance with fate that would forge unexpected bonds and leave an imprint on our souls. Our guide, a seasoned outdoorsman named Jack, led us into the heart of the rugged wilderness. His confident stride and reassuring smile instilled a sense of security within us as we navigated treacherous paths, navigated raging rivers, and scaled sheer rock faces. Days melted into nights as we honed our survival skills, learning to purify water, build shelters, and forage for sustenance in the unforgiving wilderness. Laughter and camaraderie filled the air as we shared stories around the crackling campfire, our shared experiences weaving an invisible thread that bound us together. However, on the fourth day, our reality took a sinister turn. Jack, our beacon of knowledge and our guardian in this untamed land, vanished without a trace. Panic gnawed at our hearts as darkness enveloped the forest, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to whisper of unseen dangers lurking in the wilderness. With dwindling supplies and the realization that we were lost and alone, fear threatened to consume us. In the face of adversity, something profound occurred. The strangers who had once been mere acquaintances became a lifeline, our bonds forged in the crucible of shared fear and uncertainty. Maria, a petite and unassuming tech entrepreneur, revealed hidden depths of resourcefulness and resilience. Her analytical mind dissected our predicament, devising strategies to navigate the treacherous terrain and conserve our dwindling supplies. Ethan, a burly former Marine, became our protector. His steely gaze and unwavering determination bolstered our spirits when despair threatened to overwhelm us. With his expert tracking skills, he led us through dense forests and across treacherous ravines, his presence a beacon of hope in our darkest hours. Anya, a free-spirited artist, possessed a remarkable ability to connect with nature. Her keen eyesight spotted hidden water sources and edible plants, her intuitive understanding of the wilderness guiding us through its labyrinthine paths. Together, we transformed from a group of strangers into a cohesive unit, each of our unique skills and personalities complementing the others. As days turned into nights and nights into endless days, we faced challenges that tested our limits. Hunger gnawed at our stomachs, thirst parched our throats, and the relentless elements battered our bodies. Yet, through it all, our resolve remained unyielding. We shared stories, laughter, and tears, our shared experiences deepening the bonds that united us. The unforgiving wilderness revealed hidden truths about ourselves. Fears that we had once buried deep within us surfaced, only to be confronted and overcome. The true measure of our character was laid bare, our strengths and weaknesses exposed under the unforgiving scrutiny of nature. As our ordeal entered its second week, hope flickered like a dying ember. Supplies dwindled, our bodies weakened, and the realization dawned upon us that we might not make it out alive. Yet, even in the face of despair, we refused to surrender. We clung to the threads of our shattered dreams, each of us a beacon of hope for the others. In a moment of desperation, Ethan devised a daring plan. We would scale the sheer face of a towering peak, hoping to reach a plateau where we believed help might await. The ascent was perilous, each step a dance with death. Loose rocks shifted beneath our feet, threatening to send us plummeting into the unforgiving abyss below. But Ethan's unwavering resolve kept us going, his voice a steady beacon in the storm of fear that raged within us. As we neared the summit, a crack of thunder shattered the silence. The sky turned an ominous shade of gray as a fierce storm erupted with unbridled fury. Rain lashed down upon us, blinding us and threatening to sweep us off our precarious perch. Yet we pressed on, driven by a desperate need to survive. Finally, as darkness descended, we reached the plateau. There, etched into a weathered rock face, was a faint symbol of hope, a small, faded sign marking the trail back to civilization. Overwhelmed with joy and relief, we stumbled back down the mountain, our bodies battered but our spirits soaring. As we emerged from the wilderness, we were greeted as heroes. Our ordeal had captured the attention of the nation, our story resonating with people everywhere who had faced their own challenges and emerged stronger on the other side. However, for us, the true triumph lay not in the accolades or recognition we received but in the profound and unbreakable bonds we had forged in the unforgiving crucible of the wilderness. In the months and years that followed, we remained close, our shared experience an invisible thread that bound us together. We had faced our fears, pushed our limits, and emerged as a testament to the indomitable spirit that resides within us all. The wilderness had stripped us bare, revealing the raw essence of our humanity. And in that revelation, we had found something truly extraordinary, a profound appreciation for the fragility of life, the importance of human connection, and the indomitable power of the human will. In the embrace of a remote mountain range, where the whispers of the wind carried tales of the unknown, I ventured forth on a solitary camping expedition. Nature's embrace enveloped me as I hiked through dense forests and scaled towering peaks. As twilight descended, I sought refuge in a clearing, my tent a sanctuary against the encroaching darkness. As the last embers of the campfire flickered low, a rustle in the undergrowth sent a chill down my spine. I froze, my senses heightened, every sound a potential harbinger of danger. The rustling grew louder, moving closer, its rhythm an eerie mimicry of human footsteps. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my flashlight. The beam of light pierced the darkness, illuminating a sight that froze the blood in my veins. A creature stood before me, its form unlike anything I had ever seen before. Its eyes, glowing with an infernal light, met mine, and in that instant, I was plunged into a realm where folklore and reality blurred. It was a werewolf, its fur as black as the darkest abyss, its fangs gleaming in the moonlight. Its presence filled me with a primal terror that I had never known. Time seemed to slow down as I realized that the stories whispered in hushed tones were indeed true. Monsters were not just figments of our imagination, they existed. Fear propelled me backward, my legs trembling beneath me. I tripped over a fallen log, rolling into the darkness. The werewolf lunged toward me, its claws extended. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable, but instead of the tearing pain, I heard a dull thud. When I dared to open my eyes, the werewolf was gone. Had it fled? Or was it still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the opportune moment to strike? My heart pounded in my chest as uncertainty gnawed at my mind. As dawn broke, I emerged from my tent, my body sore and my mind racing. What I had witnessed was beyond comprehension. Could it have been real? Or was it a product of my overactive imagination, a trick of the moonlight and shadows? I examined the clearing, searching for any traces of my nocturnal encounter. To my astonishment, I discovered a trail of heavy paw prints leading away from my campsite. They were undeniable evidence of the creature that had stalked me in the night. Haunted by the memory of the werewolf, I abandoned my expedition and made my way back down the mountain. The encounter had left an indelible mark on my soul. I could no longer dismiss the possibility that monsters were real, that the shadows harbored creatures beyond our comprehension. In the aftermath, I found myself drawn to books and legends about werewolves. I devoured ancient texts, poring over tales of shapeshifters and their supernatural abilities. I learned of the curse that bound them to the cycles of the moon and the insatiable hunger that drove them. As the days turned into weeks, I became obsessed with the idea that the werewolf I had encountered might seek me out again. Paranoia began to consume me. I scoured the news for any reports of werewolf sightings, my sleep riddled with nightmares of the creature pursuing me through the darkness. In the end, my fear became unbearable. I decided to leave the city, to escape the possibility of encountering the werewolf ever again. I found solace in a remote village, surrounded by people who were far removed from the horrors that lurked in the shadows. Years have passed since my encounter in the mountains. The fear that gripped me in those terrifying moments has never fully subsided. But I have learned to live with it, to accept that there are things in this world that we cannot understand. I often wonder about the werewolf, whether it roams the forests, its cursed existence and never-ending torment. And I wonder if, in some distant realm, our paths might cross again. For the creature that emerged from the shadows that night has left an eternal imprint on my soul, a reminder that the darkness always lingers, waiting for its chance to strike. My friends and I huddled around a crackling campfire, our laughter echoing through the silent wilderness. We were a close-knit group, bound by years of shared experiences and unwavering camaraderie. The rhythmic crackling of the flames and the gentle strumming of a guitar created an ambience of warmth and tranquility. As the flames danced and flickered, casting eerie shadows around us, a peculiar sensation began to creep over me. It was a subtle unease, a nagging feeling that something was amiss. The forest surrounding us seemed to hold its breath, the nocturnal chorus of crickets and owls abruptly falling silent. Breaking the comfortable silence, Ethan, our resident joker, attempted to lighten the mood with one of his signature jokes, but his words hung in the air like a forgotten melody. Our laughter had turned into a hollow echo, replaced by an unspoken apprehension. Our eyes scanned the surrounding darkness, searching for any sign of the source of our unease, landing upon a distant glow that had suddenly appeared in the far corner of the clearing. It was a faint flicker at first, barely discernible from a firefly, but it grew steadily brighter, its warm glow cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Curiosity quickly overcame our fear, and we found ourselves drawn to the mysterious light, like moths inexorably lured to a flame. We extinguished our campfire, leaving only a smoldering ember, and embarked on a silent journey toward the unknown. The ground beneath our feet was uneven, covered in gnarled roots and fallen branches, making our progress slow and arduous. The forest seemed to conspire against us, its tangled branches reaching out like grasping claws, impeding our every step. As we approached the mysterious fire, a sense of foreboding grew within me, prickling the hairs on the back of my neck. The once warm glow now cast an unsettling pallor, illuminating the distorted shapes of twisted trees and the eerie glow of unseen creatures lurking in the shadows. The source of the fire came into view, and our hearts sank. It was not a campfire, as we had initially thought, but a human effigy, constructed from sticks and rags, its crude arms outstretched in a grotesque mockery of a welcoming embrace. Its empty eye sockets seemed to stare into our very souls, filled with an unspoken accusation. Fear propelled us backward, our bodies colliding with the unforgiving undergrowth. We stumbled and scrambled to our feet, desperate to escape the malevolent presence. As we turned to flee, a chorus of guttural growls erupted from the darkness, freezing us in our tracks. We spun around, our hearts pounding in our chests like terrified drums, searching for the source of the menacing sounds. A pack of monstrous wolves emerged from the shadows, their eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger, their sharp teeth bared in a sinister grin. We were trapped, surrounded by a malevolent force that defied all reason and explanation. The wolves advanced, their heavy paws thudding against the forest floor, their glowing eyes fixated upon us. In that moment of utter despair, I knew that our lives were forfeit. We were but helpless prey in the jaws of a nightmare from which there was no escape. But just when all hope seemed lost, a profound realization washed over me. Fear, I realized, was our greatest enemy, a corrosive force that consumed our courage and paralyzed our will to survive. If we were to have any chance of emerging from this nightmare alive, we had to overcome our terror and fight, not with brute force, but with the indomitable spirit that resided within us. With newfound determination, I faced the wolves, my body trembling but my spirit unbroken. I raised my hands, palms outward, and shouted with all my might, a primal cry that defied the darkness. To my astonishment, the wolves paused, their menacing advance faltering. I took a hesitant step forward, my voice unwavering, "We are not afraid. We are not prey." As I continued to advance, the wolves slowly retreated, their eyes still fixed upon me, but a flicker of doubt had entered their gaze. I had broken their spell, shattered their illusion of dominance. With the wolves held at bay, we made our escape, stumbling and crawling through the undergrowth, our hearts pounding with both fear and exhilaration. We didn't stop running until we reached the familiar glow of our extinguished campfire, its embers still smoldering like a beacon of hope in the darkness. We collapsed around the campfire, exhausted but alive, our bodies trembling with both fear and relief. We had faced our fears, confronted the unknown, and emerged from the depths of despair with our bond unbreakable. As dawn approached, casting a faint glow upon the forest, we gathered our belongings and prepared to leave. But as we turned to depart, we noticed that the effigy was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving only a lingering sense of unease that would forever haunt our memories. We never returned to that clearing, the memory of that night etched into our minds as a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks within the shadows, and the indomitable spirit that resides within the human heart. The campground was alive with the sounds of nature, but there was an undercurrent of unease that hung in the air. We had been camping for 3 days, and everything had been going smoothly until now. It was the 4th day of our camping trip, and we were preparing to cook dinner when one of our companions, Sarah, went missing without a trace. We searched the entire campsite, calling out her name, but there was no sign of her. The only thing left behind was a cryptic note, scrawled hastily on a piece of paper. "I've found something. I can't explain it. I'll be back soon." The note left us with more questions than answers. We decided to split up and search the surrounding area, hoping to find any clues that might lead us to Sarah. As we ventured deeper into the wilderness, we began to uncover dark secrets that had been hidden for years. The first clue we found was a small, rusted key, half buried in the dirt near a large oak tree. It was old and weathered, but it seemed to have been recently used. We followed the path that led away from the tree, hoping it would lead us to Sarah. As we walked, we noticed that the forest seemed to grow darker and more ominous. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. We could hear strange noises in the distance, but we couldn't quite make out what they were. Suddenly, we stumbled upon a small, hidden clearing. In the center of the clearing was a dilapidated cabin, its windows boarded up and its door hanging off its hinges. We approached cautiously, our hearts pounding in our chests. Inside the cabin, we found a collection of strange artifacts, old maps, journals, and photographs that seemed to date back decades. We pored over the documents, trying to piece together the story of the cabin and its mysterious occupants. According to the journals, the cabin had once belonged to a reclusive scientist named Dr. Samuel Grayson. He had been obsessed with the idea of communicating with the dead, and he had spent years conducting experiments in the cabin. As we delved deeper into the journals, we discovered that Dr. Grayson had made a breakthrough in his research. He had developed a device that could supposedly summon spirits from the other side. But the experiments had taken a dark turn, and Dr. Grayson had become increasingly paranoid and unstable. We found a series of photographs that showed Dr. Grayson performing his experiments on unwilling subjects. The images were gruesome and disturbing, and they left us with a sense of dread that we couldn't shake. We decided to leave the cabin and continue our search for Sarah. As we made our way back to the campsite, we noticed that the forest seemed to be growing even darker and more foreboding. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and we could hear strange whispers on the wind. As we approached the campsite, we saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was Sarah, but she looked different somehow. Her eyes were wild and unfocused, and her clothes were torn and dirty. We called out to her, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned and ran deeper into the forest, disappearing into the darkness. We followed her, determined to bring her back to safety. As we chased after Sarah, we began to hear strange noises all around us. The whispers grew louder, and we could feel an unseen presence watching us from the shadows. We pressed on, driven by a sense of urgency that we couldn't explain. Finally, we caught up to Sarah in a small, hidden grotto. She was standing in front of a large stone altar, her hands raised above her head. As we approached, we saw that she was holding the rusted key we had found earlier. Suddenly, the ground beneath us began to shake, and the air was filled with a deafening roar. The stone altar began to glow with an otherworldly light, and we could feel a powerful energy emanating from it. We realized that Sarah had somehow activated Dr. Grayson's spirit summoning device. The spirits of the dead were rising from the ground, their ghostly forms swirling around us like a maelstrom. We tried to grab Sarah and pull her away from the altar, but she was in a trance-like state, completely unresponsive to our pleas. We knew we had to act fast if we wanted to save her and ourselves. In a desperate bid to stop the summoning, we grabbed the rusted key from Sarah's hand and jammed it into the stone altar. The energy surged through us, and we could feel the spirits of the dead being pulled back into the ground. As the last of the spirits disappeared, the forest grew quiet once again. We helped Sarah to her feet, and she looked at us with a mixture of confusion and fear. We made our way back to the campsite, our hearts still pounding from the ordeal. We knew that we had uncovered a dark secret hidden in the wilderness, and we would never forget the chilling experience we had shared. In the days that followed, we tried to make sense of what had happened. We searched for any information we could find about Dr. Grayson and his experiments, but we found nothing. It was as if the entire incident had been erased from history. We left the campsite the next day, vowing never to return. The memory of our lost companion and the dark secrets we had uncovered would haunt us for years to come. But we knew that we had survived a harrowing ordeal, and we would always be grateful for the bond that had formed between us in the face of danger. And so, the tale of the vanishing companion and the dark secrets hidden in the wilderness would become a part of our shared history, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows of the unknown.